good day to all the supporters and televiewers of DepEdR Teleturuan. Welcome to Lesson 5 of the most essential learning competencies of senior high school English subjects. I'm Jenna de Guzman Fermin from San Josep National High School, your teacher presenter for today's episode. In this episode, I will present to you the lesson about speech context and its types under the oral communication in context subjects for senior high school, mainly for grade 11. Are you ready? Let us start happy learning. We have discussed from the previous lessons that communication is very important in our lives. Most of our lives needed communication, therefore, employing it in various situations feasible. We will be discussing now about speech context. Let us first understand the term context. Context is what makes understanding possible in speech conversation. It can be the place, the number of persons involved, or the shared understanding about a topic. This had been one of the reasons why miscommunication commonly occurred. Because of the diversity of the context that supports speech or conversation, speaker and receiver should stand on the same context in order to have a successful communication. With this in mind, we should be fully aware that knowing the speech context can help us easily engage ourselves in a good conversation. There are various types that we'll be discussing today. Let me introduce to you the different types of speech context. Are you ready? Here it goes. There are 4 types of speech context. These are the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, public communication, and mass communication. The first type of speech context is intrapersonal communication. From Old Latin language intra, which means inward or within, this type of communication is very quite interesting because the communication process only includes a person. Yes, you heard it right. An intrapersonal speech centers on one person where the speaker will act as the sender as well as the receiver of the message. This usually occurs when you needed a time alone, whether to gain more knowledge by yourself or you are just contemplating about thoughts that you are interested in. An example of it is a student thinking how to answer the online exercises given to her by her parents while studying at home. She is studying alone where she generates ideas by herself and tries to solve the problem at hand. Another example is when you wake up in the morning, then you have suddenly thought of what could you do in the future or what are your plans in life. In these scenarios, the sender had been also the receiver of the message. The feedback will be based on what reaction or action the person who is doing an intrapersonal communication will come up to at the end of the process. Let's try this. Will you please think of your favorite hobby? Now, ask yourself why you are very fond of it and when did you start liking that hobby? Recall everything in your mind as if it's a movie doing a flashback. Finish? There you go. Another example of intrapersonal communication. Now, let us move to the second type of speech context, which is the interpersonal communication. Borrowing from the old language, Latin, the word inter, or we use it as prefix nowadays, means among or between. This only implies that this is a communication which occurs among people or between two people to establish relationship between or among them. This type of speech context are usually being used to have an exchange of ideas to other people. Brainstorming is one of the activities that can be done under this context. There are 2 types of interpersonal communication, which is typically characterized by the number of people involved. These 2 types are the dyad communication or dyadic and the small group communication. Dyad also comes from Old Latin language, which means a pair. That is why dyadic communication is interpersonal in nature, for there are two people sharing information where the sender can also be the receiver and vice versa. On the other hand, small group communication share the same process as a typical interpersonal communication, but it involves at least 3 but not more than 12 people engaging in a face-to-face interaction in our current situation nowadays. On the other hand, small group communication share the same process as a typical interpersonal communication, but it involves at least 3 but not more than 12 people engaging in a face-to-face interaction. In our current situation nowadays, small group and dyadic, which are usually requiring face-to-face interaction, most of the time is not that possible today. In our current scenario, interpersonal communication is still being used for we can still share information, but nowadays we do it usually through digital means. An example of interpersonal communication is when there are 3 to 12 students who are talking via online about their upcoming plans on how to still study despite staying at home. Another sample is when you and your parents are watching a movie and you share your thoughts about it. That had been the 2 types of speech context. We will be right back for more discussion.